Chapter 81. 80. Influence Freedom. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As he entered the mountain, an oscillating wave of nearly imperceptible spiritual strength bounced off the walls. Wei Wuyan's eyes shrunk for a moment, hurriedly executing a spiritual spell. Spiritual spell. Scarlet Lingering Shadow. This was one of the most vital spells inherent within a core disciple of the Scarlet Solaris sect set of spells. It concealed the physical body with a unique set of spiritual waves that adapted to other spiritual waves, allowing them to seem like a lingering shadow to observers. When the wave of spiritual strength flowed through him, not being disturbed in the slightest, he heaved a sigh of relief. The beast taming sect truly lived up to its reputation as being very meticulous and protective of their secrets. If it wasn't for his 8th stage of the Qi condensation realm cultivation base, the chances of him being able to stealthily enter this base was absolutely zero. After staying in place for a moment, he scanned the surroundings. He discovered this location was a tunnel, chiseled out with incredibly sharp tools. It wasn't circular, but square-shaped. There were lit lanterns at set intervals into the tunnel, lighting the way. He frowned as he felt the ground beneath his feet. The elemental energies were shifting oddly. Slanted. As he slid his feet carefully across, he realized the tunnel led to a slanted pathway. It led downwards. He didn't move carelessly, taking one step at a time. The lanterns are being lit by fire energies, infused constantly from a source up ahead. There was an internal array network that seemed to keep the lanterns ablaze. This required a minimal amount of resources, but it did mean that this was a commonly used passageway. The lack of dust and varied traces of physical energies that lingered in the air allowed him to gain an estimate of the traffic coming in and out. The fainter the energies, the longer it was since it was left behind. The richer the energies, the stronger the person who left it behind. With this in mind, he assumed that there were about 10,000 different individuals here. An underground city. He had traveled for nearly 300 meters, slowly entering deeper underground as a result. 10,000 wasn't too much to determine that it was a city, but this was based on simply the physical energies of this one entrance. There's no way this was the only entrance or exit of a sect. What should I do? His mind started to swirl in thought. If he wanted to, he could take the way of the brute, aggressively freeing Bai Lin and plundering everything with a heavy hand. In this scenario, he'll have to cull all witnesses. The beast taming sect was merely a branch sect of a larger organization. If he held back and allowed his identity or Bai Lin's to be linked to the massacre of the entire sect, he would be on the run from forces that might exceed the Qi condensation realm. He knew that each and every individual stage of the Qi condensation realm was stupendously massive in differences of strength and abilities. For example, a mortal god, a 6th phase cultivator, had the power of creation. A god lord, an 8th phase cultivator, can create avatars, manipulate a person's mind, scry for spiritual and Qi signatures for an incredible distance. His own ambient awareness could notice things dozens of miles away without any effort, yet descend on an area within that range with a single thought. He didn't even know what god kings or those who exceeded the Qi condensation realm can do. If he faced such an opponent, he might not have to wait for the calamities of hell to descend to die. Therefore, that method required a full culling or simply can't happen. The sensible option was to rescue Bai Lin quietly. The issue with that is, if he did, the beast taming sect would know he was responsible if he flew with her. Either choice felt like an enemy would be born with a single slip up. I'll have to figure out what to do. Caught in this dilemma, he truly felt that the heavenly Daos left out an important detail. Own. Just as he thought this, deciding on how to approach this situation, he felt a surge in his head as if being whispered to. But, it was abnormally loud and he was fully aware. As he felt the clarity of those instructions, he shook his head to regain focus. He sneered, how contemptuous. So, they steal Bai Lin and therefore every last one of them are sentenced to death. He wanted to spit on the heavenly dais, their means and methods disgusted him as it tried to influence his state of mind. If it wasn't for his bloodline of sin, he might have been a mass murderer today, eradicating everyone present. This was what he was told. Save your beast, kill them all. According to the 3,000 commandments of the heavenly dais, anyone who wrongs you, who they interact with, and everyone that shares karmic ties with them, can freely share the fate you impose on them. Essentially, if the father smacked you in the face, it was okay to slaughter him, the entire family, the dog, the friendly neighbor, and the entire city. That's ridiculous as all fuck, absolutely disgusting. As long as they had karmic ties with them via association, no matter how loose, it was sufficient for them to share the fate of the culprit. After all, the father sinned, so it was okay. Is this the lucky chance I have? He felt disdain and contempt, but then he paused for a moment. It's not like the lucky chances he had before didn't include killing others, but he hadn't even given it a thought before. He beheaded the son and father of the Ash Dragon City without a hint of enmity between them, merely plundering his wealth for the sake of it. Was that not a sin? Then, he recalled something. The Ash Dragon City Lord was a member of the Gaia state and a newly minted mortal god and elder of the Earthly Titan sect. The Scarlet Solaris sect and the Earthly Titan sect were not allies, and had quite a bad history and tense relations. Was this really enough to justify his indiscriminate killing of the Ash Dragon City Lord and his son? The answer of the heavenly dais. Yes. As long as they were connected by any karmic ties, no matter how loose or distant, you can slaughter without care. Only indiscriminate killings without reason or relation was considered a sin by the heavenly dais. He suddenly felt an urge to regurgitate his lunch. Was it really so indifferent and blind, so static and simple? Was this the heavens people worshipped and praised? He truly couldn't fathom who designed such a flawed set of rules. But, was it really flawed? What right did he have to determine that? His eyes flashed with acute brilliance and enlightened intelligence. Looking at his right arm, his eyes narrowed sharply. The heavenly dais influence us, but aren't you doing the same? How pathetically hypocritical. A bloodline that goes against the heavens, influencing my thoughts and instincts. His eyes became incomparably cold, as harsh as the tundras of winter. I don't want to have my thoughts influenced by you or the heavens. Wei Wuyin felt his heart harden with this thought, his mind growing more stable and firm in his belief of individuality and his own life. He was forced to become an inheritor of sin by the true possessor, not chosen by the first sinner. He was already abnormal, awakening the bloodline of sin before the realm of sages, according to the black skeleton, and he survived a calamity without a soul of true sin. Perhaps this was why his viewpoint wasn't as set as others. His mind still being molded into his own. The disdain, contempt, and disgust he felt due to the bloodline of sin's influence was removed from his mind. Even his alchemic heart of Eden chi was glowing as it sent soothing rays of light into his sea of consciousness. Just as he was about to investigate, he felt a trembling beneath his feet. His head snapped downwards as the trembling continued. It was faint, but present. Rumble. His first instinct was to send his spiritual sense through the ground. His spiritually infused elemental chi enabled his sense to penetrate all forms of elements, including earth. However, before he could get the chance, he suddenly felt his body lose its footing. His eyes widened as he noticed a large, gaping hole had almost magically appeared beneath him, capable of fitting 10 of him. Before he could gather his bearings, a strange pressure exerted itself on his shoulders and caused him to plummet against his will. He didn't exclaim nor shout, keeping his mouth shut as his chi started to quietly circulate. He couldn't fly, but he could glide, but this didn't feel like a trap. The force that pressed against his body was gentle, and even a hint weak. It seemed that the slightest resistance was enough to shatter it, even a child could. It was as if this pressure was trying to tell him, no, beg him to descend. This feeling emerged in his heart and he felt even more certain. He prepared for a fall, but he didn't resist. He fell for quite a while, exiting the hole and entering a spacious underground chamber. It was so dark that even his spiritual sense felt blind. It was an odd darkness, but he could still gauge the area of this chamber. It was about 30 kilometers in length and width, shaped like a square box. He continued to lightly descend until he landed, touching ground amidst the darkness. His eyes surveyed the darkness but found nothing of note. What wanted me to be here? Looking up, he saw the hole. If he wanted, a leap and a climb could return him to the surface. Thump. 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 Wei Wuyin felt his body tremble. The trembling was consistent with the faint rumbling he felt beneath his feet above. It sounded like a heartbeat. He ignited a ball of fire. Qi, bringing light to the darkness. Surveying the spacious chamber, his curiosity was piqued to the maximum. Then, he turned around and came to an abrupt stop. His eyes froze. Pupils shrunk and eyelids nearly disappeared. His mouth opened. Jaw low and mouth wide. Wei Wuyin. Chapter 82. 81, Azure, Scaled. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Huge. Massive. Colossal. Humongous. Gargantuan. It was hard to describe how it felt in words, and those words barely clarified or demonstrated as to what Wei Wuyin was currently witnessing and the thoughts that rang within his mind. An eye. It was an eye. A sea of golden was its sclera, as expansive as an entire world. And situated in this world was an iris with lines that denoted a level of intensity that could shake the heart, rumble the mind, and terrify the soul. Those lines led to a sharp pupil, black as the darkest night, that led to what felt like purgatory. Intense. Shu. The gigantic pupil and iris of this eye moved. Wei Wuyin stepped back instinctively. He didn't feel fear. In his life, fear was facing the unknown, not the known. This eye belonged to a living existence that was larger than his current conceivable belief, but merely that. Only interest entered his heart, nothing more. His silver eyes calmed, as did his expanding and contracting lungs, and mind. With his sense of self restored after that brief momentary loss, he lifted the ball of fire Qi higher as it illuminated more. An azure color caught his attention. His eyes narrowed to catch a glimpse, ignoring the intense stare of the eye. What are you? He murmured to himself. You are odd. A voice entered his mind, transmitted directly to it via mental energies. Wei Wuyin was startled for a moment. You can transmit messages directly to my mind. How powerful and mystical this existence must be. While he could communicate with Bai Lin, that was using his spirit which harnessed mental energies, funneled through its spiritual strength, and even then, it was vague and unclear. However, this was a complete sentence that he completely understood and in a language he was incomparably familiar with. A beast can do this. His horizon had expanded this moment, including the breadth of his belief. While he had met that black skeleton, knew about the secrets of the heavenly Daos, his understanding of the actual world was still lacking. I can, odd human. Wei Wuyin fully registered every syllable and could even recognize that it belonged to a male. Wei Wuyin lifted the fireball closer to the eye. It had to be at least 300 meters, and that was merely the eye. He had never seen an eye that large before, and the way its lines were vivid and its shape was so sharp, he felt intrigued and invested into knowing its species. Why did you call me down here? Wei Wuyin wasn't idle. He approached the azure color highlighted by the light. Without an ounce of apprehension, he rubbed his palm on its surface. A scale. He recognized the texture. It reminded him of the scales of lizards, hard yet flexible. There was a reason he didn't feel fear towards this gigantic creature beyond his comprehension. Firstly, if it wanted to, he felt that a creature of this size could instantly kill him. Secondly, it had cautiously used its mysterious powers to beg him to descend. It needed him for something. Odd human. I ask for your help, the creature spoke. Its powerful mind transmitted messages made Wei Wuyin dizzy, a little unaccustomed to this means of communication. After a shake or two of his head, Wei Wuyin calmly responded, with what, life. Was its only word. Wei Wuyin frowned. Without any hesitation, he kicked off what he could only believe was the creature's body and blaze upwards. His movements were beyond swift and decisive. A tremor nearly tossed Wei Wuyin's consciousness into the dark depths when a vast strength impacted his entirety. This strength was ancient, mighty, and monstrous. It erupted in his mind and soul as it gripped his sea of consciousness in a paralyzed state. Wei Wuyin's two spirits of qi that resided in his dantian reacted, as if responding to a massive threat. From his pores, a vast amount of elemental and saber qi exited, shrouding his body protectively in a ward, yet his body was still frozen. He didn't simply freeze in body and soul, but while in mid-air, his body lingered there as if in a stasis state of time. This strength was imperious and horrific, seizing his sense of control. He quietly descended without his own power, unable to move even a finger. This creature's strength exceeded his mental limits, but he didn't feel a sense of deadly crisis, simply restrained. This confirmed his theory. In truth, he had merely leapt to see if this creature had powers still remaining. If not, perhaps he could move to kill it. While it seemed selfish, whatever this creature needed him for might not be worth the risk, so dealing with it might be a better alternative than falling into some ungodly trap. However, experiencing this unrivaled power, he could only calm down his thoughts and focus on other things. Human. The creature spoke once more, but a waning feeling was accompanied by this voice, as if it was weakening. Boom. Wei Wuyin felt his mind experience an explosive eruption originating from his alchemic Heart of Eden qi. The alchemic Heart of Eden qi's cyclone that spiraled endlessly within his sea of consciousness started to glow and flick scintillating 7-colored light. Its form started to rapidly change. It became a tree. This tree was the exact shape of the Tree of Eden that housed the Eden Earth sect. Its roots buried itself within his sea of consciousness, embedding itself into his motor controls and even connecting with his intangible soul. The Tree of Eden started to explode with light, its body and self majestic and infinite. It was as if the light was a decree of territory, making its invincible domain. It was as if all foreign influences were no longer allowed. How fearsome. What? Wei Wuyin felt his bodily and spiritual controls return. A wave of disbelief surged inside his heart as he moved while the strength of the creature still imposed its restrictive will. However, that wasn't all. Element. A saber emerged in his sea of consciousness as if it had exited from his soul and entered his mind. It brandished its sharp edge and struck ruthlessly at the restrictive will. Before a moment passed, the will was obliterated by an imposing, deadly slash. The gigantic eye's pupils constricted. A soft groan that caused the world to tremble resounded. Wei Wuyin could tell that it was in pain, likely the rebound of the Tree of Eden and Element's joint counterattack. Wei Wuyin never expected his spirits and nascent saber soul to run to his defense without his will. His eyebrows furrowed deeply as he returned to his previous position. You. The creature's pained voice was suffused with shock and disbelief. It obviously didn't think that Wei Wuyin could remove and even destroy his restrictive powers. Wei Wuyin relaxed. Don't think I'm an easy target or fool. What are you and what do you want? If you don't wish to be clear, I'll leave. The eye that had constricted started to shiver slightly as a large layer of flesh started to descend. Wei Wuyin was taken aback, only to realize that it was the eyelids of the creature. In seconds, it closed, sealing off the eye and revealing an azure color. Human, the voice sounded again, but this time it was softer and wasn't mental. His eyes turned to the darkness where the voice originated from. He spotted an azure shadow glowing softly with azure light. Its shape and form was indistinct. It was dozens of meters away and seemed to be shimmering into existence like a mirage in the desert. Sending his spiritual sense to inspect, his eyes flashed with comprehension. An avatar. But this one lacks physical substance. A spiritual avatar. He was quite familiar with avatar arts, having created his own, and could instantly recognize it. He walked forward until the distance shrunk and the figure became clearer. When it did, fully forming, Wei Wuyan's heart raced with excitement and shock. A dragon. It had the head of a lizard, with nostrils flared, 5 claws on its 4 legs and hind legs supported by powerful muscles. Azure scales covered the entirety of its body, and with the glowing light, it looked beautiful as if it came from the immortal world. Its wings were folded, but they seemed meaty and powerful. At the top of its elongated snout, a single curved horn rested. It was thicker than Wei Wuyan's arm, but the entire beast was dozens of meters high. He couldn't even tell how long it was, with spikes protruding down its back till the end of its tail. Dragons were considered legendary creatures in the Myriad continent. They were creatures of myths that could never be substantiated, but always mentioned in literature and ancient records. In these records, there was a time that dragons ruled all creation, soaring through the starry skies to other worlds, and dominating every species. The humans, demons, elvens, and more worshipped them religiously. However, weren't those just stories told to embolden the desire for adventure in children? In his lifetime, he had never believed he would see one. When the avatar fully formed, likely representing the larger dragon that was currently shrouded by darkness, it spoke. I am Anu, a grand creature of this world. Human, I need life force. I'm willing to bestow upon you great fortune in exchange. Its voice was alluring, but Wei Wuyan pouted, seemingly unaffected. Fortune. Great fortune. He asked in a deadpan manner, can you bestow to me the cultivation of the realm of sages? Anu halted, its eyes flashed with clear confusion. Realm of sages. Was that a location? No, he said, cultivation. Seeing the creature's spiritual avatar stumped, Wei Wuyan's eyes rolled in its sockets. Damn, and here I thought I was saved. Chapter 83. 82, Extorting Blood for Life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Since the creature, named Anu, didn't understand what the realm of sages was, then it likely exceeded its understanding or was strictly human-based. In that case, he was out of luck for a method to ensure his survival even if the calamity of hell was deemed a failure. I don't have much life force, and why me? You have about 10,000 or so other candidates above you. Wei Wuyan instantly questioned this entire thing. If life force was all it needed, there was quite a bit just above ground. Devour or snatch away, and if it must be given willingly, he imagined barely anyone would refuse a dragon in hopes of a big boon. Unfortunately, this dragon met Wei Wuyan, an existence that could give zero shits about this great fortune unless it could ensure his survival. Anu's spiritual avatar slithered closer, revealing its exquisite spiritual form and bright golden eyes. It seemed to be inspecting Wei Wuyan, as if confirming its original assumption. Then within its gaze, a bright light of excitement flashed with a faint smile. He had never seen a lizard smile before. It was very awkward at first to witness such a normal human reaction on a beast. Even Bai Lin only smiled with her eyes, or expressed happiness in its vocal cries, never a literal smile. You have life force. A vast, unfathomable and inestimable amount of life force within you. Anu stated with certainty. Inestimable amount of life force. He immediately was taken aback, recalling his entire life. When did he become an immortal? If so, calamities of hell come at me. But that was wishful thinking. He pondered for a moment and then touched his chest, feeling the powerful beasts of his flesh and blood heart. A mark had been placed in his heart by the tree of Eden. It contained its inherent wood energies and life force. Because of its creation, its physical body collapsed and killed millions. He had tried to use this mark of Eden, for a while now, but the life force within was essentially useless. He was brimming his life force, young and youthful with a healthy body and strong cultivation support. In fact, his lifespan already exceeds his cultivation level. When he tried to draw out the life force within, it did nothing to his physical body. It was likely because his current life force was like a cup filled with water, more water didn't help and simply spilled over. Normally, this would excite cultivators because if they get old, if they refine this life force into their body, they could live far, far longer than average. Unfortunately, with the calamities of hell hung over his head, his existing lifespan wasn't the issue, it was not being obliterated in mind, body and soul due to failure. A total death. No amount of life force will help that. As for the wood energies, they would be useful if he needed wood energies for his cultivation. He didn't. While it may have been useful in the early and middle stages of the Qi condensation realm, the 9th stage required something more than just wood energy to reach it. Wei Wuyin frowned. If it needed life force, then he could give away quite a bit with no loss to himself. While he didn't know how much life force was stored in the Mark of Eden, he knew that the Tree of Eden was not near death. If he made an educated guess, maybe a few 100,000 years might be it. And even then, that could be incredibly low. Balling it. He truly didn't know the exact amount. How much do you need? And what can you offer? He asked. Without needing to worry about experiencing a loss in this exchange, he could use this to gain as much as possible. Anu's eyes flashed with excitement. Wei Wuyin's willingness to exchange was godsend, a lifeline in a dark time. 10,000 years of life force. I can offer anything from methods unique to my race, arts, and even my blood essence. With it, you can harness the strength of a true dragon. Was his reply. Wei Wuyin decisively said, too much. Anu's spiritual avatar revealed a shocked expression as if in disbelief at Wei Wuyin's refusal. Unlike Wei Wuyin, he could sense the dense and vibrant life force emitted from his heart. It seemed endless. By his own estimate, 10,000 years was minor and insignificant. Is it too difficult to give so much? Anu questioned. Wei Wuyin shook his head, no. It's super easy, barely an inconvenience. Then why? Anu felt exasperated by such a casual response. Super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Then why refuse? Wei Wuyin shrugged, I don't know you. I don't feel comfortable giving you that much. Anu's avatar started to distort in chaos, nearly losing its form. He was choked with frustration. I'm offering you everything I can, but you want to limit what I desire. However, Wei Wuyin didn't care. This Anu was an existence that exceeded every facet of his imagination. He didn't know why it couldn't forcefully take his life force or others for that matter. Even evil cultivators had means to extend their lives by plundering others, but this dragon seemed unable or unwilling. Regardless of which, he didn't want to do a deal that immediately gave him everything he wanted. Who knew if he would kill him after? So he said, I'll give you 1,000. In a few decades or centuries, you can find me again, and we can do another deal. All right. While he didn't know if he would live for a century, this way, the dragon would need him. Anu grumbled as a result, but his desperation was clear as he nodded in defeat. This even made Wei Wuyin feel somewhat bad for this dragon. Was it too good-hearted, naive, or something else entirely? If it's something else, the only thing he could conceive was that it was near death, true death, and needed life force to survive. In that case, he'll extort the maximum without any guilt. We'll do 3 drops of your essence blood, the spell or art you use to freeze my body, and the method to use your essence blood. Wei Wuyin knew that essence blood originated from a beast's heart and it constituted the most condensed form of their bloodline power. Bai Lin consumed a fruit that changed her essence blood, hence the awakening of her profound powers. This wasn't limited to merely beasts, but humans could have a bloodline and even essence blood. Han Yu, his subordinate in the Scarlet Solaris sect that detonated himself in an attempt to kill Mei Mei, had an aquatic bloodline that helped his cultivation. He could even breathe underwater, but he was mostly human with tiny aquatic augmentations. If he found a means to use Anu's essence blood, couldn't he gain the abilities of a true dragon that he mentioned? If so, could this improve his chances of survival? While these were all uncertainties, he felt he needed to at least try. That spell or art that froze his mind, body, and soul was something he absolutely needed to walk away with today. How fearsome was that? A mere gaze and he could render cultivators frozen. Anu's lizard face contorted somewhat. Wei Wuyin greed knew no limits with his demands. He wanted to negotiate but take it or leave it. And we'll be doing a spirit oath. For 1,000 years, you can't bring harm to me, personally or by proxy willfully. This was his final straw. While he wasn't entirely sure that a spirit oath would affect a beast, he had to try. He didn't have any other knowledge of other oaths except the heavenly oath. According to the scripture of sin, he couldn't perform that under any circumstance, otherwise his identity as an inheritor of sin would be revealed. Because the heavenly Daos were an arbiter in deciding the fairness of the oath, it closely watched the participants down to even their thoughts. This was far too intrusive and unable to conceal his status. Anu begrudgingly shuffled its body, but in the end, fine. He had to agree. Wei Wuyin nodded. Oh, be sure your essence blood is fully refined, removing any of your will or marks of yours. Anu's eyes bulged. He was near death's door. If it wasn't for this, he wouldn't mind biting off this human's head for lunch. Yet he could only grumble to himself, cursing Wei Wuyin's greedy ancestors who taught him how to snatch a mile when offered an inch. Wei Wuyin smiled. Let's begin, shall we? Chapter 84. 83, Unexpected Massacre. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wei Wuyin furrowed his brows, his silver eyes gleamed with sharp confusion and uncertainty. The spirit oath had been uttered, and the exchange had taken place. With a mere thought, he extracted life force until it amounted to roughly 1,000 years. He couldn't be exact, perhaps even a few years off, but he was certain that the margin for error was merely a decade or two. This was a loss he had to suffer due to his unfamiliarity with life force measurements. Regardless of his loss, this confusion he'd experienced was not brought about by that, but by the process. While he had used the life force in mild testing before, he had this faint feeling that losing this amount of life force, even if it originated from the Mark of Eden, should have some consequence, such as a deep sensation of weakness or something along those lines. Yet, he stood without a hint of exhaustion or damage. It was that simple and easy. As for Anu, the life force was siphoned into his spiritual avatar and entered into his scales. It fused with his unfathomably large body in a perfect merger, seamless and sudden. The process wasn't as epic as he assumed. Before all this, he had received the methods, arts, and essence blood drops that were stipulated in their agreement. The essence blood was shiny translucent blood like glass, lacking that crimson-red and sleek texture of normal blood. It was incredibly odd to look at, as if it was a liquid drop of glass rather than blood. Furthermore, it lacked any hint of the smell typical blood possessed. They were encased in diamond-shaped crystals that radiated a dense and compressed spiritual strength. It seemed to be a spiritual spell that could contain essence blood. This was his first time witnessing essence blood visually with his own eyes. Typically, when he inspected Bai Lin, her essence blood was golden and burning, a sharp contrast to her other blood. But that was by spiritual sense. His spiritual sense lacked the depth of actual color. What he saw with his spiritual sense was usually an aura which took on colors. After all, his spiritual sense wasn't his eyes, ears, nose, or skin. While it could send feedback to those physical senses, they weren't perfect representations. In the exchange, he obtained a method and a spiritual spell. The cultivation method was named True Dragon Transmutation Method. Within this method was a variety of dragon-based martial arts, including a unique art called the True Dragon Armor. According to its description, it could essentially erect empowered scales around the body, supplementing defensive and offensive strengths of the physical body. It was then that his horizons expanded, learning about the intricacies and existence of martial arts. The method detailed an extensive list, including the principle around their executions and power. Unlike spiritual spells that relied on spiritual energies, spiritual strength, and spiritual aura, or chi arts that relied on chi of a large variety, martial arts relied on the fleshy body, physical energies, and bloodline power within one's heart. This meant that every move that Bai Lin used that galvanized her bloodline power was a martial art. He was fascinated by this discovery and new means of cultivation. The spiritual spell was called the fixed soul spell. It was what Anu used to suppress his sea of consciousness, body, and spirit. It seemed to attack the root of their existence and hub of control. The soul. When Wei Wuyin learned of its details, and how it affected the soul and had very little ways to defend against it, he nearly drooled. This spell was insidious yet absolutely godly. Unfortunately, it required a cultivation that far exceeded the chi condensation realm. According to Anu, he'd have to reach a particular stage of human cultivation, the realm after the chi condensation realm, that focused on enhancing one's spiritual strength. Furthermore, it had to be strong enough to pierce through the spirit and affect the soul. While bummed by this harsh requirement, he still felt excited nonetheless. I can't wait to examine all this in detail, but I've delayed enough. Wei Wuyin's eyes became sharp, focused, and flashed vicious intent as he gazed at the hole within the ceiling of this spacious chamber. He hadn't forgotten about Bai Lin, nor would he ever. While he was still conflicted on how to approach this matter, he prioritized saving Bai Lin first. His chi started to invigorate his body, lending it boundless strength as he bent his knees and eyed the hole. With a single thought, he was ready to propel himself through the hole and return to the entrance. Rumble. Abruptly, a vast, deep rumbling sound emanated from inside the spacious chamber. He nearly lost his footing, having to use his recently gathered chi to hastily stabilize his figure. Despite being in an awkward position body-wise, his attention was drawn to the source of this rumble. It was caused by a single, powerful, impacting beat. A heartbeat. It was as if it had been revitalized, strong and explosive that caused the entire world to experience a trembling. Rumble. He felt it again. This time it was far clearer than before. What's happening? He asked, his chi surging through his body. At a moment's notice, he was ready to react to any unexpected events. However, he didn't have any fear in his heart. This creature that may be a dragon of legends had formed a spirit oath to not bring any harm to him, even by proxy. If it was before he saw the vast spiritual strength that indicated that it had an existence similar, if not the same, as his spirit of chi, he would have been a little vigilant. After all, it was a creature of unknown, unfathomable cultivation level. The fixed soul spell betrayed this. I'm cleaning up a few insignificant, detestable little worms, the words of Anu echoed in his mind once more. It was enlivened, no longer seeming on the verge of death or ancient as the beginning of creation. In fact, it felt vigorous and youthful. Wei Wuyin's expression changed as he seemingly came to a realization. Before he could question Anu, a vigorous without limit aura started to radiate from every fiber of monstrously large scale, flesh, and bone of this dragon. Shroom. It was as if a sun was birthed within the spacious chamber as azure light erupted endlessly and without restraint. Wei Wuyin was immediately blind. His eyes stung as if bees had pierced them with their stringer. With clenched teeth, he conjured an elemental and saber chi ward in hopes of isolating the azure light, but it easily seeped through it. Even through closed eyes, all he could register was azure light and a bright intensity unlike anything he'd ever encountered before. The boundless aura washed over his entire body and seemed to cause his blood to boil. An uncomfortable feeling emerged in his heart, and while it didn't hurt, it felt as if his heart was being pervaded by this azure light. This lasted for a total of 20.7 seconds. A mere 20.7 seconds. When the azure light started to recede, dissipate, and disperse in all manner of speaking, Wei Wuyin opened his eyes to realize that everything was tinted with an azure color. This wasn't the objects, walls, or shadows being painted azure, but the lingering effect of being blinded by such intense light. While he felt that it was temporary, it truly felt as if he lived in a world of azure. "What did you do?" Wei Wuyin directly asked. He felt incomparably shocked that the life force that he'd given was refined so swiftly, enough to allow its power to return to this level. He didn't know what this azure-scaled, one-horn dragon-like creature did, but he felt that it had likely shaken the world. "I've killed some despicable insects, nothing more." An unfeeling voice resounded. It was filled with a casual air that contained a hint of disgust, as if speaking about throwing out garbage, or stomping on a cockroach in your home. A feeling of foreboding emerged in Wei Wuyin's heart as he looked up, the hole still present. He didn't hesitate, shooting upwards like a rocket. His elemental wind chi surged, giving him lift, and furthering his propelling speed. When he entered the hole, he stomped his foot to the wall, and sped up his ascending speed by another notch. He was like a speeding sparrow as he exited the hole, returning to the entrance pathway of the beast-taming sect. His spiritual sense didn't hold back as it widely investigated the entrance and beyond. His eyes bulged. Boom! Elemental art. Thunderstep. He flashed through the entrance in a matter of seconds, coming to the end, which was a gate that was in the process of being closed, yet halted midway. His eyes narrowed as he caught a glimpse of what lay inside. He gingerly walked forward until he entered the opening. Those silver eyes of his swept the area. Just as he thought, this beast-taming sect had an underground city. But none of that was important. His gaze fell onto a body, fully clothed, belonging to a young woman who couldn't be more than 20 years old. She laid there, peacefully and without a hint of life exuding from her. She was now a corpse. When he touched her neck to find a pulse, a faint wave of azure light flashed beneath her skin. His heart tensed. Why did he even need to find a pulse? His spiritual sense had already concluded her status. Deceased. Perhaps it was his unwillingness to accept it. Those same silver eyes lifted and witnessed what seemed like a peaceful underworld. A graveyard without graves, a battlefield without blood, a sect without life. Bark. SSSSSS. Meow. Cree. Cow. The sounds of various animals, lively and free from all restraints, erupted from all over. He saw canine beasts, feline beasts, serpents, and more of all types of species and races emerge from buildings or simply walking about in the middle of the corpse-littered streets. Anu had killed all humans. He understood, but a deep sigh still left his lips. Chapter 85. 84, The Last Heart. You are listening at novelfull.audio. While he didn't want to slaughter them all to the last, it seemed it mattered not what he desired. The heavenly Daos intended for this sect to experience a calamity of immense devastation. He was merely one of its means to achieve. Perhaps this was supposed to punish their sins. What sins? Well, Wei Wuyin didn't know. He had half a mind to dive back and question Anu for his actions, but that impulse faded as quickly as it came. He was not a saint, and what had already happened, it was an unchangeable circumstance. Cree. Despite all the death, a warm smile tugged at his lips as he turned to see Bai Lin soaring freely in the skies. It seemed that azure light didn't just kill all the members of the beast-taming sect, but removed all physical restraints and spiritual marks on these beasts. Anu gave them their freedom. As a beast, this probably seemed right and proper. Furthermore, who knew if unknew was also being used and abused by the beast, taming sect in his weakened and near-lifeless state. After all, he was located directly beneath them. There had to be a story there. Cree. Bai Lin landed next to Wei Wuyin, stretching out her head. Wei Wuyin caressed her and the smile on his face grew larger. This matter didn't affect him, and Bai Lin was safe. In fact, she should be thanking Anu for his actions. With one action, he no longer needed to worry about offending a force as strong as the true beast, taming sect. That being said, with a dastardly grin on his face, a glint of greed on his face, let's loot. These corpses had all sorts of treasures, materials, essence stones, pills, pellets, elixirs, pastes, beast.methods, beast.arts, and all sorts of things hidden within the depths of this beast, taming sect. While he wouldn't be able to search their memories for their unique spiritual means, he might be able to find notes or a physical copy somewhere. If the former, he could explore creating his own. Cree. The word loot triggered Bai Lin's excitement. The duo's greed was unconcealable. Outside the Warring States pagoda, Wei Wuyin and Bai Lin were still quietly waiting for Su Mei to exit. In his hands was a large bag that jingled with a metallic ring. These were the storage rings of all the beast, taming sect's members that were in their sect. Unfortunately, his three-layered ring couldn't hold all the items of a sect within its mere 2 spaces, so he would have to find other ways to store the excess. Not only did he take their storage rings, he swept the herbs and minerals they had stockpiled within their sect. He pretty much took any and everything of value, including cultivation arts or methods and the bricks of the building. Outside of a land of corpses, the entire city was stripped completely bare. I don't know if this is the highest karmic luck value that I lost, but back when I left the Scarlet Solaris sect to search for Mei Mei, I lost 8.7. There, I had a chance to obtain a great benefit at a high risk. However, the heavenly Daos underestimated my strength. He silently considered as he estimated his immense gains. The heavenly Daos only revealed a path, but never outright gave him anything. While it would lead him to objects such as the 3-point body or an essence stone, it was his choice whether to grasp it to its fullest and make use of it. The meadow lifewood essence was a chance and required talent to take advantage of. Despite this understanding, he had no idea if the benefit was meeting the gigantic scaled creature or wiping the beast, taming sect clean of its resources. In fact, it could be something far off to the future, not including either of those things. Wei Wuyin looked at the sky as he searched his sea of consciousness for the etched inscriptions that detailed the 3 arts and 1 method he obtained. As he read through them, his eyes would sometimes reveal a light of confusion, sometimes go blank, and sometimes aglow with realization. The true dragon transmutation method is awe-inspiring. The cultivation method described several ways of becoming a half-dragon with true dragon blood. He felt that he understood that the beast before may not have been an actual dragon, but one with dragon blood. It would transmute one's bloodline and allow them to take the path of becoming a dragon. He also learned that dragons weren't beasts. They were called divine myths of heaven. He didn't fully understand why the name, but they weren't literal beasts. However, beasts were descendants of them. There were even humans who were descendants of them. Therefore, there were humans out there with a dragon's bloodline. He sent out his chi and retrieved an azure crystal that contained a refined drop of essence blood from the 3-layered ring. This essence blood contained the bloodline of a dragon. Bringing it over, he carefully inspected it. According to the method, I can choose 3 ways to refine this essence blood. Firstly, I can choose to refine it into my heart. This is the most common method. It has no risks of death or failure, and allows one to produce normal blood of a dragon. However, my heart will only be able to perform a single refinement and my body will undergo an uncontrollable mutation. Instead of becoming just half-dragon, I would refine the essence bloodline of the gigantic scaled beast, becoming half-beast, of the gigantic scaled beast legacy, and half-dragon, losing my humanity. However, it's the most powerful path, allowing for the quickest progression of power. Forsake my humanity for power and transformation. He pondered this for an entire hour before shaking his head. Even if he was going to suffer a calamity in the future, he had no desire to transmute his species. This method seemed geared towards beasts, not humans. The second method is to refine the primal yang with essence blood energy. With this, I can propagate dragonborn children. I can also cultivate using this newly formed draconic primal yang and cultivate my body with its energies. This was a rather neutral method, and accompanied with it was a moderate increase in personal potential and power. It was long and far-seeing, allowing your children to become greater than yourself. The ultimate sacrifice. He decisively shook his head. He only had 30.9 years on his clock, and he didn't want to raise children knowing he wouldn't be able to protect them for life, guide them through their struggles and give them love. If he went in knowing that, the degree of depression could warp his thoughts. The last method is to is it possible. As he read the last method, he frowned in thought. This felt like it was geared towards humans, but he wasn't sure. After all, that gigantic scaled beast had spiritual energy and thus could cultivate. The third method was quite risky and revolves around a concept that breaks his preconceptions, in much the same way as the Haven Heart Chi method once did. It was using a vast amount of life force and energy to refine the essence blood. By doing this, they could give birth to a divine mark of myth. Then, using this mark, a person would integrate it into their physical essence, permeating it throughout every facet of their fleshy matter. This would act as a primer for them to create a draconic heart. When he first read it, he didn't quite understand what it meant. However, after reading it multiple times, he understood. It was the process of creating a draconic heart of chi. However, it was different and completely crushed his understanding of cultivation. Because it didn't use metaphysical chi, but a metaphysical blood line. A draconic heart of blood. A person would cultivate according to the prescribed method, strengthening their bloodline energy in much the same way they enhance their chi, through the essence of heaven and earth. It was considered to be the most difficult in the long run and brought about strict restrictions and requirements. Not to mention, it started out the weakest of the three. The most important thing was that it was available only to children who have yet to cultivate, not those who formed their heart of chi. The reason for this was the requirement was the same as why a person couldn't form two heart of chi. It required essence, matter, mind, and spirit to be condensed in its entirety. Wei Wuyan's eyes lit up. If he was a normal cultivator, he would be at a loss, but he possessed the Haven Heart Chi method. With this, he could follow the procedure as before. He could split his mind, transform his physical energies and physique anew, and change the state of his meridians. As for the spirit, he knew that he could easily tap into his soul and utilize another piece. That was the easiest aspect of the technique, having accomplished it several times before. However, if I do this and create a draconic heart of blood, I won't be able to use the Haven Heart Chi method again. As he analyzed the aspects of this new bloodline, he knew it would make it nearly impossible for him to restructure his physical body ever again. At the moment, only pure energy was refining his body, but this would shift his DNA entirely. If he tried to shift it again, he would lose his bloodline. All the resources and essence blood wasted would be useless, and his ability to use the draconic heart of blood would cease. It would be in much the same way as his previous selves were unable to control his two hearts of chi. After several hours of thinking, he decided to do it anyway. He didn't have an infinite life, so he can't keep creating more and more hearts of chi. In fact, he didn't want to, nor was he confident he could. His soul wasn't limitless, and he wasn't someone who reached the realm of sages. He couldn't cultivate his soul. Who knew what type of damage that would happen if he split his soul into portions and fashioned into countless hearts of chi? In truth, Wei Wuyan would not be able to exceed 4 hearts of chi. Not only was it due to the limitations of his soul, but the limitations of the method itself. As he split off a portion of his soul to construct his spirit, if he removed too much, his soul would destabilize and falter, collapsing in on itself. It would be a rather brutal death, with the possibility for reincarnation no longer existing. This will be my last birthing of a spirit. He swore to himself, revealing a rare form of determination. Chapter 86. 85, Dragon Heart, Draconic Blood. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Roar. An infinitely fierce, thunderous sound reverberated throughout the immediate external world. It seemed to have originated from divine myths, erupting from within Wei Wuyin. He currently sat calmly within a newly hewn-out cave within a mountain located within the hidden shadow domain. Because he wished to form the draconic heart of blood with his greatest effort and focus, he settled down for a session of secluded cultivation. A few days ago, Su Mei left the Warring States Pagoda after undergoing the trial of material Tao, darkness. It was a complex, advanced energy type, and even with her sheer talent, she wasn't capable of birthing even the normal darkness chi. However, when she exited, she wasn't distraught or sullen at her failure. She was enthralled in the profundities of darkness and felt even more willing to cultivate it. As for her reward gained for her progress in the trial, she received a cultivation method called the Tenebrous Light of Night method. It denoted the means and method to cultivate darkness and light energy, and even shadowlight chi, a rare, incredibly difficult chi that is even harder to cultivate than elemental chi. Wei Wuyin supported her in this endeavor. Seeing her excitement for it only enhanced his desire to use whatever he could to support. Furthermore, she had reached a critical point in her cultivation, nearing the 5th stage of chi condensation, non-growth phase due to the benefits gained from the trial and her own efforts before. With the resources and alchemic products he created, her cultivation base had already started to increase by leaps and bounds, allowing her to near the final refinement of yang energy. If she could reach this stage of cultivation, her strength would rise to a high level. Su Mei had already given birth to a unique, high level wood chi, and was working on her lightning chi. She decided to take a similar path to Wei Wuyin, birthing all 9 elemental energies to supplement her physical, spiritual, and core energies. Wei Wuyin, of course, supported her fully. As a wielder of elemental chi, he infused her body with the purest of elemental energies periodically earlier, so she was bound to succeed. As for himself and his progress in creating a 4th and final heart of chi, the process of splitting his mind once more was a relatively easy feat. He believed it had to do with his alchemic heart of Eden chi, which originates from the mind Tao, and allowed him to apply the 7 traits of alchemy. In fact, the act of transforming his essence and rebirthing his physical matter was far easier with the support of the alchemic heart of Eden chi. After all, the 7 traits of alchemy included extraction, growth, containment, refinement, creation, transformation, and fusion. After doing so, he tapped into the boundless life force within the Tree of Eden's runic mark and forcefully refined the 3 drops of essence blood into a divine mark of myth. He didn't know how much life force was used exactly, but by a rough estimation, he believed it required about 1,000 to 2,000 years of pure, raw life force energy. It radiated a unique draconic aura, overbearing and sovereign of creation. It felt mystical and was shaped like a runic formation with dense characters he couldn't read, thousands of interconnecting lines and symmetrical structure, and was crimson in color. Despite all these characteristics, it was only the size of a fingernail. The life force washed out the bloodline of the gigantic scaled creature and left merely the purest of draconic aura. Marveling at the changes, he felt an intense desire to immediately absorb it, condensing his mind, matter, essence, and soul into a spirit. He realized that only untainted life force like that which originated from the mark of Eden could have this effect. He was startled to discover that it was entirely unrefined, making it relatively easy to make your own. If he had taken the evil cultivator route and extracted life force from others, perhaps a single person's 60-year cycle of life force might not rival 60 days of the mark of Eden's pure life force. Fuse. Wei Wuyin decisively started the process, drawing the divine mark of myth into his body. It became like gas, seeping swiftly into every facet of his fleshy body, bones, sinews, meridians, arteries, veins, and even organs. It had begun. The refinement process was much shorter than he expected. After a few hours, his entire body emitted a raw, unfettered aura of draconic power. When his eyes opened, his silver eyes were not circular pupils, but took the shape of a thick, sharp line, at the core of which radiated an azure light. Condense. He felt the fundamental substructure of his body change, and he immediately condensed his entirety a fourth time. Without haste, he steadily merged his mind, essence, matter, and soul into a spirit. However, this spirit did not nestle itself in his dantian, but concentrated itself within his flesh and blood heart. He expected a strange turn of events, so he didn't panic. Instead, he believed that it related to his bloodline. It made sense to settle itself at the origin of his blood. After 3 full days, his spirit was birthed within his heart. However, when it nestled itself into his heart, it did not create a cyclone of chi or formulate a metaphysical core that could store energies of various types. Instead, strings of blood exited the spirit, connected with his heart, and created various changes. Newly produced veins and arteries were birthed, seeping through the entirety of his body. A wave of pain erupted as he started to seizure. He couldn't control himself as his body spasmed uncontrollably, his eyes going to the back of his head, and his body closing up its motor functions. For several minutes, he spasmed without end on the cave's floor, his mouth filled with drool and his eyes at the back of his head. Gasp. When he finally regained control over his body, he inhaled heavily as he regained his ability to control his muscles, rectifying his eyes' location and his lack of motor functions. His pupils were no longer the thick, sharp, vertical line familiar with the lizard species. Instead, they returned to normal. That was intense. He hastily checked his heart, inspecting his current state. What? He exclaimed, his mouth agape in wonder. His body now had additional sets of veins and arteries that were connected to the heart. Not only that, his heart's flesh was shiny. It had been refined thoroughly, emitting metaphysical energy that shrouded it like a gaseous cloud. As for his heart, it contained the divine mark of myth and a dense trace of draconic bloodline energy. His heart had become his core. Moreover, it was surrounded by a cloud of bloodline power, akin to a heart of chi surrounded by a chi cyclone. He gulped slightly, his mind surging with amazement at the various unexpected changes. It's at the first stage of chi. No, blood condensation. He felt that the cultivation path of this was similar, but not the same. The critical point for chi condensation realm was to evolve the state of chi, accumulate energy of the world until it can become one. But this one seemed to be to evolve one's bloodline. That's right. The divine mark of myth had transformed his innate bloodline. If he spilled a drop of blood, it would contain draconic aura. While he wasn't a dragon, he had the bloodline of one. And he had the opportunity to increase its strength through cultivation. According to the true dragon transmutation method, the third method of establishing a draconic heart relies on 2 aspects of cultivation: bloodline energy and bloodline purity. I need to find essence blood or items that can increase the purity of my divine mark of myth. At the moment, it can be classified as nearly the lowest degree of purity, formed from 3 drops of that gigantic scaled creature's essence blood. It's currently a divine mark of mortal myth, 2nd level. There are 3 grades, each divided into 7 levels: mortal myth, mystic myth, and immortal myth. As he repeated this information, his expression grew stern. The naming sense of these grades matched the grade of alchemical products. However, one is not accepted or rejected by the heavenly Daos while the other. He wasn't quite sure. I guess all things in cultivation have connections. With this, I've established my 4th heart of cultivation. I can no longer renew my flesh unless I discard my bloodline entirely. He clenched his fist, causing the world to tremble and the air to rumble chaotically. This was just the sheer force of his fleshy body. The changes to his body were immediately apparent. My fleshy body has jumped in power and quality, but I've only reached the first stage of the blood condensation realm. If it follows the same logic as chi cultivation, then I'll need to use the essence of heaven and earth to strengthen the bloodline power with worldly energies. The first through ninth phases. He slowly determined as he formulated a plan. Su Mei was cultivating nearby, likely going to require at least a full month before she reached the next phase. With his alchemical products, he could cultivate both his alchemic heart of Eden Qi and draconic heart of blood to the fifth phase as well. His cultivation speed was far, far faster because he possessed his self-created externalize heart Qi method. With it, he could bypass the refinement and time-consuming parts of cultivation, and directly have his heart/spirits directly absorb pure essence and energy. With the vast resources claimed from the beast taming sect, this should be easier than cultivating before. Let's start. 20.8 days later. Su Mei sat in her cave, closed eyes, in a well-balanced lotus stance, as she fiercely cultivated. She was rapidly absorbing the yang energy she obtained from Wei Wuyan's yang blazing elixir, a 6th grade alchemical product. In fact, this was her 5th one. She had absorbed 5 bottles of yang blazing elixir and had yet to ascend to the 5th phase of yang growth. The difficulty of cultivation was often underestimated by geniuses, but those who aren't exceptionally talented required resources and cultivation grounds to better develop or reach the same level. In comparison, Wei Wuyan could have ascended by the first bottle, but Su Mei had consumed 5 and had yet to do so. She was also exceptionally talented. It was merely her innate bodily compatibility with yang energies that hindered her progress. It was this vast difficulty that hindered people of different genders at the yin form or yang growth phases, unless their background was astonishing. Luckily, her aura started to rapidly shift and heighten as the build-up of yang energy reached a zenith state, slowly allowing her heart of qi to naturally contain yang energies. A dense, lively aura of vitality started to surface from her body as she cultivated. This was the first sign of ascending, allowing one's core and qi to contain innate yang energies. Her fleshy body would also benefit, growing her lifespan, extending her youthful appearances, and strengthening her bodily functions. Ha! Hoo! She inhaled deeply and exhaled the same, releasing a wad of turbid qi. The world faintly trembled. When she opened her eyes, various images emerged from nothing and they were filled with innate vitality, a fresh and lively feeling effused from each and every one of those images. I did it. Her heart was elated as she finally accomplished her goal of ascending to the 5th stage of qi condensation. Now, she was a step closer to becoming a mortal god, and standing above hundreds of millions of cultivators in the world. While Wei Wuyan was a godlord, as his soldier, his servant, she deeply desired to not fall too behind. Luckily, Wei Wuyan had exceptional alchemy skills. Not only was he fiercely powerful, monstrously talented, breathtakingly handsome, but he was profoundly skilled in the most difficult profession known to man. Alchemy. A single 6th grade alchemical product like the yang blazing elixir could induce wars amongst 2nd and 3rd tier forces. Let alone 6. Yet, she had access to it without question. If she wasn't numb to Wei Wuyan's achievements, she would have lost her mind long ago. She used another hour to quickly consolidate her cultivation base, fortifying her yang energy, and integrating it thoroughly with her qi. After some mild testing, she left the cavern. Shockingly, Wei Wuyan and Bai Lin were right outside. Wei Wuyan and Bai Lin were playing some sort of game reminiscent of catch, but slightly different. They seemed to be having fun. Her heart suddenly warmed at the sight. Cree. Bai Lin noticed Su Mei's exit first, or at least acknowledged it first, and cried joyfully. Her tone made it sound like she was congratulating her. A tinge of pink surfaced on Su Mei's cheeks, highlighting her feminine traits, as she bowed in thanks. Despite Bai Lin being Wei Wuyan's mount, Su Mei knew that the crane could devastate mortal gods like they were trash, and thus treated her with equal respect. Bai Lin's eyes revealed a smile as she flew over, her large body eclipsing the sunlight and immediately shrouding Su Mei in her shadow. She used her wing to rub Su Mei's arm. It was some form of communication, like a pat on the back. As if saying, "You don't need to be so formal." Wei Wuyin laughed, striding over with carefree steps. His aura was restrained, but when Su Mei saw him, she felt that he had changed fundamentally. "Congratulations on your breakthrough. It isn't easy, but you achieved it," Wei Wuyin warmly said. "Thank you, Lord Wei." Su Mei once more bowed formally, but Wei Wuyin didn't mind her attitude, unlike Bai Lin whose intelligence and human-like thoughts became greater and greater by the day. Her human-like considerations truly was reaching new pinnacles each day. Not only that, her growth seemed to still be occurring. Before, when Wei Wuyin first met her as a child all those years ago, she was barely 10 meters in height. Barely capable of carrying 3 people. But now, she was 40.3 meters in height. As for her wingspan, it was massive. He constantly marveled at her still developing size without end. He was curious as to what height she'd reach at the end of her maturity. The only inconvenience was entering a city with flight restrictions or small housing areas unable to give her room to breathe. She was bigger and larger than most city walls and buildings. Bai Lin simply stood out with her golden eyes, golden beak, and elegant yet powerful aura. "You're ready?" Wei Wuyin asked Su Mei. While it wasn't entirely appropriate to regard the opinion of a subordinate if she or he was ready to depart, he still did so. This was because in Wei Wuyin's heart, Su Mei was more important than any ordinary subordinate. The day she decided to leave the Scarlet Solaris sect with him was a day he'd never forget, even in death. "Amen," Su Mei responded swiftly with a clear nod of her head. "Good." Wei Wuyin calmly smiled. He had reached the 6th stage of Qi/blood condensation with his alchemic heart of Eden Qi and draconic heart of blood, infusing them with all 9 elemental, Yin, Yang, and Yin-Yang energies. The force of the world had assimilated perfectly. He now understood that the blood and Qi condensation realms were 2 different carriages on the same road. They were now refining his fleshy body, bloodline, and sea of consciousness with elemental energy, giving all these traits unique benefits, and furthering his overall strength. Therefore, he was ready to depart. The last stop on his list was the Wu Astral Tower, and he wished to see one of the top 3 beauties of the entire country. In the Wu country, there was a lifestyle-type force that ranked cultivators of prominent renown and status. It included any force that had a mortal god-level figure standing behind it. One of these ranking lists was a beauty ranking. According to the list, the top 3 beauties of Wu country were the granddaughter of the Aqua Siren, who was the descendant of the godlord of the Aqua Echo sect, the Bai clan's white holy priestess, who was a mortal god, and the youngest princess of Wu. Wu Baozhai. He wanted to witness the majesty of the imperial capital city, visit the Wu Astral Tower, and observe the beauty of Wu Baozhai. He was determined to cross each of these off his list. Bai Lin readied herself, leaning her body so they could easily ride on her back. The duo did so, and the trio once more took off, heading for the imperial capital city, otherwise known as Heavenly Wu City. In Heavenly Wu City, in the imperial palace, there was a room designed with a noble and elegant decor. In this room were 2 individuals. These 2 individuals were people Wei Wuyin would instantly recognize. One of them had ocean blue eyes that seemed to contain a dense spirituality, long, brunette hair cascaded down her back like a perfectly gentle waterfall and split at her shoulders. Those strands of hair seemed to be perfect, and they led one's gaze to an utterly mesmerizing valley that was her chest. Her height wasn't impressive, being average, but her slim, bottle-like frame, incredible curves, and flawless jade skin left one breathless and desiring to see more. Her long, thin eyelashes and phoenix-like eyes that seemed to carry profound truths of the world drew one in. The other a beauty with short blonde hair, resplendent blue eyes, wearing a pure white gown, and a shapely physique from top to bottom. Her arms were clearly firm in tone, indicating a strong body beneath that gown. A holy, faith-like aura shrouded her, and her light pink lips seemed to be the softest pieces of flesh in the world. They were Godlord Lin and the seer. Godlord Lin's expression was calm as she spoke, "I'll stay. I hope you're right about this." The seer had an excited expression, "I am. Not only will he come for you, you'll benefit greatly from this." Godlord Lin's eyes sparkled with ambition, and a hint of love. In the Wu Central Lands, there was a handsome man. He wore a black martial robe, wore a sheath of a sword on his back, and a calm expression. His clear, unfathomable black eyes and short black hair fluttered with the wind as he stared ahead. Next to the man was a woman. She had emerald-colored hair and eyes, they were clear and filled with an innate sensation of nature. She was astonishingly beautiful and seemed to be one with the world as she walked. They walked side by side, hand to hand, one could tell their relationship was intimate and true. "Long Chen," the woman gently called out to the young, handsome man as if she wanted to say something. He turned around, and gently held her jade-like hands. With a smile, he comforted, "It'll be fine. I'll save her, no matter what." If Wei Wuyin saw him or her, he would be deeply shocked. Chapter 87. 86, In the Sky Sword Domain, we meet again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After exploring the Warring States Pagoda, their next destination was the Wu Central Lands, the capital territory of the imperial clan. Within the Wu Central Lands was Heavenly Wu City, and above that magnificent city was the sky phenomena known as the Wu Astral Tower. It was a construct widely known as being mystical, attracting all sorts of myths and legends to it. Furthermore, it was a symbol of the Wu clan. It signified that, as long as the construct was steadily within the sky, the Wu clan would forever exist within the Myriad-Year continent. There were countless youths and geniuses who wished to claim it for their clan, or create their own clan-defining symbol that would be regarded as a legend in the hearts of the civilians. Those with ambition in the cultivation world were practically endless. Even Wei Wuyin, once upon a time, wished to do the same. Unfortunately, due to the awkward route he decided to take to make the Jade Pearl Lake his first priority, they had to enter the Sky Sword Domain. It should take only a few days to a week before they left the domain, entering the Wu Central Lands. Hopefully, without incident. Cree. Bai Lin transmitted her thoughts to Wei Wuyin. It was incredibly clear, startling Wei Wuyin. His eyes brightened a considerable degree as he pressed his palm on her broad back. Those thoughts weren't mental transmissions, but his spirit felt it. She revealed her hunger. "Are you developing spiritual strength?" Bai Lin's transformations were endless, still beginning. He pondered for a moment and extracted an ancient leather tome titled Treasures of the Phoenix Dragon. This book listed all sorts of mystical materials found within the vast heaven and earth, including the golden phoenix fruit Bai Lin inadvertently consumed all those years ago. It was obtained from the beast taming sect's secure vault that stored most of their knowledge. According to this, the golden phoenix fruit is incredibly rare, and is created from a drop of ancient phoenix blood that infected a fruit. Its subsequently produced seeds can germinate to produce this fruit. However, the chances are astonishingly low and required at least 10,000 years of continuous passing before the blood is refined by natural means to be consumed. Furthermore, it can only benefit creatures with an ancestral lineage to the phoenix. Wei Wuyin deeply frowned. Since dragons could exist, phoenixes definitely did as well. The true question was how. But, when he thought about drops of blood, the alchemic heart of Eden Qi started to thrum oddly. A flashback took Wei Wuyin to a different time. It was a time of a small sprout being crushed, a drop of blood touching it. Wei Wuyin had always felt that it was because of those drops of blood that the tree of Eden grew to what it was. A large, gargantuan mammoth of a tree that had mental awareness and emotions. The book foretold that creatures that consume the fruit can touch upon their ancestry, awakening a world-shaking level of power. They would also develop from being basic creatures to gaining bloodline powers and even spiritual capabilities. When he first came across this, he felt confused as to how beasts can develop spiritual abilities without a spirit condensed from their mind, body, essence, and soul. It was only after delving deep that he found that beasts' spiritual abilities were innate and natural. Born. All of them had a spirit within their heart at birth, and it centered around their bloodline. It was exactly like his new heart of blood chi. His spirit was centered and manifested as his mortal mark of myth, the source of his draconic bloodline. It was this very same spirit that allowed beasts to control their bloodline powers and racial traits. Therefore, Bai Lin always had a spirit within her heart, but she lacked energies and forces that could strengthen it. The golden phoenix fruit contained dense bloodline energies that enhanced her spirit. He kept the tome and said, "Every day, you grow." Imagining Bai Lin reaching the strength of Anu excited him. Cree. Bai Lin cried with likewise excitement. Despite not visibly seeing him, she could truly extrapolate his emotions from just his tone. Before long, perhaps Bai Lin would be more intelligent than some humans. Su Mei was quietly sightseeing the world, taking a brief break from her cultivation. She had ascended to the 5th stage of qi condensation, the yang growth phase, and needed to calmly consolidate her cultivation base. Her yang energies were vibrant, causing her normally pure, black eyes to be unreasonably bright. Oh! Those eyes of hers had spotted something. She sent her spiritual sense to investigate, catching a faint glimpse of an abnormal event. "Lord Wei," Su Mei called out. Wei Wuyin retrieved his palm and turned to Su Mei. Her eyes were truly bright and beautiful. Even he was slightly in awe as to the extent of her vibrant yang energies. After 5 yang blazing elixirs, it's to be expected. Her entire body must be adapting to the fierce energies circulating through her body. His eyes were drawn away by her gesture. His eyes were far more powerful than Su Mei, and thus he saw more. A slight furrow of his brows later caused his spiritual sense to descend. His eyes sharply narrowed as a familiar figure emerged in his sense. Furthermore, that figure had noticed his spiritual sense arrive and was currently observing them in the sky. A few kilometers away, a group of individuals were gathered. They were divided into a clear set of 3 groups. One was clothed in scarlet robes, sporting the scarlet Solaris sex insignia upon their shoulders, chests, or back in full view of all. The second group was mixed and matched, but tightly gathered. They seemed like a group of unaffiliated cultivators that were held together by an alliance and a promise of something greater. The last group were all crisp and clean, sharp auras emanated from every last one. Their demeanors were aloft and calm, exuding an immortal-like bearing as if they were above all common mortals. It was both awe-inspiring and anger-inducing. They all carried swords kept in white sheaths. From these swords, faint sword chi lingered that seemed to release low-humming sharp keens. At times, one would feel as if a sword was right before their ears, waiting to pierce through and reach their most crucial organ, seeking to end their life. It was quite vivid. This was a coalescing effect of sword intent developed by sword cultivators. They definitely belonged to the number 1 sect of Wu country and leader of the 5 great sects, Sky Sword Sect. At each group was a single leader that stood out. At the alliance of cultivators was a white-haired middle-aged man with narrow, chilly eyes that seemed to contain the world's most harshest blizzard. He was tall yet slim, and despite his cold facial features, he was handsome. His white hair and dark skin gave him an impressive look that was unconventional yet attractive. His tall stature and aura that seemed to be seething with grand strength helped complement his looks. On the Sky Sword Sect side, it was a young woman that Wei Wuyin would notice a mile away. She seemed to be about 20.5 to 20.6 with breathtaking features. Her thin eyebrows, impeccably jade-like skin and long, lustrous black hair that stretched until it barely tapped that round ass of hers were endlessly attractive. She didn't lack in height, being just above 6 feet, and those legs of hers that barely revealed themselves behind her white hanfu with an icy blue trim was tantalizing. Despite her attractive looks, such as those plump cherry lips that seemed as soft as water, she carried herself with a fearsome moment. Her sword that hung at her waist was emitting the highest degree of sword chi in terms of purity, and her every being seemed like a sharp sword. Until others who may only have a sword seed intent, her sword intent had fully developed. The last figure was amongst the Scarlet Solaris sect. And this figure was the one both Su Mei and Wei Wuyin noticed from afar. Her golden eyes could snatch all color from the surroundings. Her jade skin, slim figure with alluring curves, gentle aura, and pearly white smile, made her seem like an immortal fairy descending to the mortal world. She still donned a short-sleeved white cheongsam with golden images of the sun and vines embroidered on its surface, tight-fitting and perfectly accentuating her feminine assets. When she spotted Wei Wuyin, her eyes brightened as she brushed her pale white hair behind her ear, a heavenly smile on her lips. She used her voice that was like curated music of the highest level that perfectly suited one's tastes. A heavenly hymn in its own right. "Come here, please." While she was merely speaking vocally to Wei Wuin's spiritual sense, her voice caused almost all the men present with weak wills to turn soft. It was Mei Yang, otherwise known as the Helios Witch. Chapter 88. 87. Enlist. You are listening at novelfull.audio. While those beside Mei Yang, the beautiful Helios Witch, nearly buckled at the knees by her light and heavenly voice, Wei Wuin's reaction was somewhat different, a frown. His past with Mei Yang was brief yet impactful, and for a moment, he had desired to rescue Mei Mei from her clutches and kill her on the spot. It was this woman's deliberate words that led to his inevitable conflict with the Scarlet Solaris sect. While the matter would have been revealed at some point, and thus he would have been hunted regardless of any action on her part, it still left a bitter taste in his mouth. Normally, he would stay far away and avoid this mischievous woman with utter indifference, but his curiosity was piqued by the gathering of strong auras and individuals. The three forces gathering had cultivators that, at the minimum, were at the fourth stage of the chi condensation realm. They were all elder-level figures of the greatest sects in Wu country. This had to be a monumental gathering with an ultimate purpose, enough to spur at least 2 of the 5 great sects into action. After a brief spell of consideration, he decided to sate his own curiosity. Bai Lin immediately understood and changed course. Her actions and speed drew the gazes of the gathered elites. They lifted their eyes to observe a variant crane arriving, many of their expressions forming a faint frown. This was especially so for the dark-skinned, white-haired, frosty middle-aged man at the lead of misfit-dressed cultivators and the young woman with a sharp aura that seemed to wish to bleed the very air. Mei Yang revealed a dazzling smile, youthful and vibrant. Her appearance seemed more like the gorgeous young lady from a high-ranking family than a figure that could cause trepidation and horror in the hearts of others, a godlord. Bai Lin arrived in epic fashion, her eyes releasing faint glimmers of golden light and an impressive presence. When she landed nearby, her wings caused the wind to whip into a fierce gust. Even those elite cultivators were affected, unable to ignore such a large beast arriving. The chilly-eyed middle-aged man's eyes narrowed as he spoke, his words glacial yet natural, "Who are you?" His words caused the others behind him to put up their guards. They knew that this leader of theirs was typically hot-headed despite his chilly exterior, typically killing before questioning. Therefore, this new arrival must be someone respectful. Currently, Wei Wuin's aura and cultivation was thoroughly concealed, but his eyes and physical presence was overwhelming to the various senses. This was especially for those with honed sensory abilities far exceeding the norm, such as mortal gods and godlords. It wasn't simply that group that lifted their guards. Those sword cultivators all had their hands on their hilts, ready to reveal to the world their sharpness and tenacious will. They looked like a ferocious bunch, unlike the immortal sword wielders in legends. Mei Yang intervened, "Jian Daiyu, Dong Fa, this is Wei Wuyin." Her introduction was brief, obviously directed to the two leaders of the group. She maintained her smile amidst their sharp looks, seeking an explanation. With elegant and light steps, she approached Wei Wuyin. Getting off by Lin, Wei Wuyin was rendered shocked. It wasn't because of their auras, impressive cultivation bases, or Mei Yang's casual introduction, but Jian Daiyu. She was gorgeous. Extraordinarily gorgeous. His heart was immediately sent aflutter. Her looks were delicate, sharp, yet impeccable in both symmetry and structure. Everything about her, from her cherry lips to her sleek black hair that fell down her back, faintly flowing with the wind, was to his complete and utter liking. He was rendered into a state of disbelief and shock when he visually witnessed her appearance. Mei Yang arrived a few meters away. "It seems your little departure did you well." When she last saw Wei Wuyin, he had just ascended the 7th stage of the Qi condensation realm, sublime Qi phase, and revealed extraordinary ability. With his astonishing talent revealed, the distraught and weakened Scarlet Solaris sect could only watch in despair as he left. Author's note. At the time of his double ascension, chapter 58, he was bereft of 8th phase level Qi or spiritual Qi, so she and everyone else remained ignorant of his true cultivation base. The sublime ascension phenomena was the only visible indicator. She hadn't taken action then because it wasn't her place, nor her business. She had merely arrived there as a guest elder to stabilize the Scarlet Solaris sect's fate and simply wanted to see chaos erupt, not embroil herself in it. Wei Wuyin's abrupt escape even startled her, but made things interesting as she watched Wu Chen and his parents toil in agony knowing that Wu Chen's inevitable demise or crippling was to occur with each passing day. If they could, she didn't believe that they wouldn't pay any price to see him dead. Wei Wuyin didn't respond, merely brushing off her comment like dust. His gaze lingered on Jian Daiyu for a moment before he looked towards Mei Yang. Towards this woman, he had utterly no fear in his heart. Unlike when they last saw each other, his cultivation base had been fully consolidated, his body brimming with spiritually infused Qi or spiritual Qi. Furthermore, he had 2 spirits of Qi to derive from, both divine, type spirits with exceptional spiritual strength. His other 2 hearts of Qi were merely at the 6th phase, but they could not be underestimated. While he couldn't say with confidence that he was invincible amongst godlords, he was definitely top-tier. The only issue was his lack of appropriate spiritual spells and Qi arts at that level, and this could lead to a gap between top-tier and invincible. However, Mei Yang was similarly a newly ascended godlord, with less than a decade under her belt. He didn't lose his courageous heart when considering his chances. Perhaps it was possible to even kill her in a single exchange, like Gu Futu, the god in headlights. He owed her for saving Mei Mei when he couldn't, so he set this faint intent to murder aside. "Why did you call for me?" His tone was inquisitive but indifferent. Mei Yang didn't let Wei Wuyin's attitude dampen her smile or mood. She responded with a teasing tone, "Don't you think it's fate that we've met again?" Her implication and forward presentation of herself could cause many men to stumble with desires beneath her skirt. His eyes remained disinterested. While she was a star-like beauty, he saw a glimpse of her true personality back in the Scarlet Solaris sect. He had no interest in women who loved chaos and directly schemed for it. It went against his own principles. "You're no fun," she sweetly stuck her tongue out, completely not acting her age. Wei Wuyin's heart shivered when he realized this woman's name as a mortal god had been present for at least 3 centuries. With the average lifespan of 500 years for mortal gods, this meant she was fairly old. Fine. Surprisingly, she became less silly and more serious. "You're a peak mortal god, and I wouldn't mind having a little assurance in this mission. I called you over to enlist your help, what do you think?" It was a mere coincidence that they met, so he had very little concern about her overall motives. Otherwise, he would have the suspicion that this had all been orchestrated to lure him in and kill him for Wu Chen. With a light frown, he asked. You gathered nearly 100 elite elder-level figures, with 8 early, mortal gods, 2 peak, mortal gods, and a godlord. The peak, mortal gods were Jian Daiyu and Dong Fa, the leaders of the Sky Sword sect members and the mix. Matched cultivator group. They had cultivation bases at the 7th stage of the Qi condensation and could be considered top-tier sect master-level characters in Wu country. Mei Yang's brows lifted slightly. Wei Wuyan's spiritual sense was exceptional. However, remembering his exceptional talent, she accepted it. Yes. It's a pretty big job. You want in. In truth, Wei Wuyan was interested even before he landed. Benefits. As an Lord Alchemist, an alchemist that can concoct 6th-grade products suitable for 7th to 9th stage experts of the Qi condensation realm, monetary wealth was a simple matter of selling a few products. His true issue was rare materials to concoct high-level products, lack of Qi arts, spiritual spells, and Qi armaments. Eddie Et Mei Yang realized that Wei Wuyan was already willing to agree, and she explained, in the Yuhei country, a group of evil cultivators had migrated here and have been committing all sorts of atrocities. They've amassed all sorts of things with their heinous activities, and were capitalizing on their weakened state to eradicate them while simultaneously cleaning the myriad-year continent of its filth. Her words may sound vicious, but she said them with a bright smile. So, murder and plunder. Wei Wuyan bluntly stated. Mei Yang dazzling chuckled, yep. Wei Wuyan didn't know if the cultivators were legitimately of evil cultivators, but the fact they've been targeted by 2 of the 5 great sects meant, in the event of their demise, they would be deemed as such to all of history. Wasn't it the same for the Violet Moon sect? Their members were now slaves or dead, while their sect name was dragged through the mud. All of this convenient blaming was merely for the surface, to justify their intentions. Tell me the truth. His eyes narrowed as he faced Mei Yang. Mei Yang was momentarily shocked, but regathered his mind. Right, Wei Wuyan wasn't some brainless youth that would jump to action. He was known to be intelligent and cautious in his actions. She took a soft breath. All right then. The Yuhei country's former imperial clan ancestor died from old age while the older and younger generation were pathetic and useless. They rode on the dragon's lap until it died. Now, they were pushed off their throne and replaced. 3 years ago, they were nearly eradicated, but a few core members and elites were capable of leaving and hid away. We've recently discovered that they were located in the Sky Sword domain. Before they left, they brought nearly all of their clan's stockpiled resources and wealth away. Mei Yang's tone was tinged with a dark and greedy reverb. Wei Wuyan nodded. This made more sense. He had even heard about that during his seeking of information about the world, so he knew she was telling the truth. This was something he had little issue doing, capitalizing on the weakness of others. The stockpiled resources of an imperial clan would be totally mind-boggling, as they had a cultivator beyond the Qi condensation realm at the helm and controlled the majority of wealth in the country. He was not above greed. In fact, greed has driven many of his actions and allowed him to reach his current level, so why would he be? You in? Mei Yang asked, but from the glint in Wei Wuyan's eyes, she already knew the answer. I'm in. Chapter 89. 88, The 3 Group Identities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wei Wuyan had no qualms with the act of plundering, nor with taking advantage of others for his own benefit. While he wasn't to the extent of being an evil cultivator, he exemplified the characteristics of an elite cultivator. In a world of strength, very rarely do you use resources you searched for and discovered yourself. From the 3-point physique to the Ash Dragon City's vault, he had always capitalized on opportunities to the best of his ability. Since becoming an inheritor of sin, this belief and principle was further accentuated. He remained cautious and calculating, trying to determine the best benefit with the smallest loss. This was his approach when facing anew, and it will be his approach for the future, such as right now. Agreeing in this expedition to plunder a fallen imperial clan was packed with benefits and risk. The tools, arrays, resources at their disposal would have been accumulated at their height. While they couldn't prevent their inevitable fall without an expert capable of calling forth the wind and rain, they could ensure their survival with the threat of mutual destruction. However, what shocked Wei Wuyin was the line-up sent. Where were the two godlords of the Sky Sword sect? To think they'd merely send a single peak, mortal god to oversee this while the Scarlet Solaris sect sent a godlord. The benefits they could gain would be definitely less than the Scarlet Solaris sect, and this would happen in their territory. This baffled Wei Wuyin. While sword and saber cultivators were known for their fierce offensive power and combat prowess, it seemed odd to not send at least one. And, what about the misfit band of high-end cultivators? Where did they come from? Just as he was wondering, Mei Yang explained everything. According to her, even she was surprised by the lack of godlord presence from the Sky Sword sect. But they were busy, with one roaming the world and the other at a crucial point in cultivation trying to strive for the 9th stage, to become a god king. Therefore, they only had their vice sect leader, Jian Daiyu, available. She was 4th in command, beneath the two godlord ancestral elders and sect leader. She was highly renowned and known as the Sword Flash Goddess. It was said the speed of her sword could reap lives minutes before they realized their death. While this was likely an exaggeration, it was impressive and indicative of her exceptional prowess. As for the other group, they were known as the Earth-Sky Alliance. They were loose cultivators that gathered together in the Sky Sword domain. They didn't have a godlord as a leader, so they couldn't establish their own domain, but due to Dong Fa, a peak, mortal god, they were a top-tier force just beneath the 5 great sects. After all, there weren't more than 200 mortal gods, known and hidden, in Wu country, and the majority are 6th phase mortal gods. Those at the 7th phase could become sect leaders of the 5 great sects, so it should not be underestimated. Before Wei Wuyin and Mei Yang returned to the group, he informed Bai Lin and Su Mei to find food and cultivate until he found them. With a wave of his hand, the white mist that was false mortal god avatar became a bracelet on Su Mei's wrist. Su Mei realized Wei Wuyin's intent and accepted it. Bai Lin, who had declared her hunger before, was ecstatic as she flew away. Wei Wuyin could only form a thin smile as he shook his head. While he wouldn't mind riding on Bai Lin to plunder, and he was sure she wouldn't either, he actually wanted to test his prowess on live targets and not rely on her. With her enthusiastic inclination for battle, she would probably scorch everyone in sight. Thinking this, his smile grew wider with a hint of happiness. BL.net. So, let's meet everyone. After that interlude, Wei Wuyin and Mei Yang set off. When they arrived, he was eyed with an intense gaze. There were even a few cultivators executing optical spiritual spells to peer into his secrets. If it was any other time, this blatant act of disrespect would be met with a swift lesson. Luckily for them, this was a joint mission. Mei Yang had already introduced Wei Wuyin's name, but these elites were quite unfamiliar with it. A disciple from the Sky Sword sect stepped forward. He directly asked Wei Wuyin, "Are you really Wei Wuyin from the Scarlet Solaris sect?" Wei Wuyin was shocked when he heard a mere disciple step up to talk. This area had mortal gods, and this disciple was merely a young growth expert. However, when he observed this brazen fellow, his heart was tickled with remembrance. It was a young man with a thin physique, his short black hair was common, but his eyes were wrapped by a black blindfold sealing off his vision. His entire body had a restrained yet unforgettable sharpness. It was sword intent, polished and defined. He was like an unsheathed sword. This impression triggered his memory as he recalled a young man more than 10 years ago. Dao Xin. He recalled this name. Dao Xin was the young sword cultivator that took the lead during the task force at Mu Lake. He gave him a lethal impression at that time. Unlike Wei Wuyin, however, Dao Xin's cultivation speed was just barely above the genius standard. In the short span of these 11 years, he was incapable of reaching the mortal god level. Even Mei Mei was considered exceptional for reaching the mortal god level before 60, a feat that is still heralded as a phenomenal achievement among the younger generation. You are Wei Wuyin. Disbelief was written on Dao Xin's expression. So many things happened to the Wei Wuyin that he remembered. He was an elite cultivator that reached the Yin form phase and birthed 2 advanced elemental qi, steel metal qi and violet lightning qi, all at the age of 20.6. Unfortunately, he went through an odd deviation and then left. There was news of his return, but a few years later, he was declared dead after having left the sect on his own. This was a verified and accepted fact. Many lamented in the early death of this staggering genius, yet now, if his eyes weren't blindfolded, they would be bulging with surprise. Wei Wuyin. The various members mumbled to themselves, but the name didn't trigger any memories. Wei Wuyin was unimportant for the vast majority of his life. Would mortal gods pay attention to a talent of another sect that had no background? Absolutely not. As for his brief reveal, they might have learned of his existence, but likely not his name. However, Dong Fa's expression changed after the name was repeated numerous times. His eyes roamed to Bai Lin's departure route. When he once more observed Wei Wuyin, his chilly eyes contained a hint of vigilance and fear. In his heart, saber ascendant. He's the godlord that fought the Jade Lotus sect and got rid of the Lei family. There were quite a few rumors circulating, some embellished and exaggerated, but they all had a consistent feature. An unearthly handsome man arrived atop a crane and faced the entire Jade Lotus sect alone. They conceded without a fight his cultivation at the godlord level. He was an acquaintance of the Lei clan's mortal god, so their demise obviously reached his ears, including details of it. While he was reeling at his discovery, Wei Wuyin smiled at Dao Xin. It's been a while. After that, he didn't talk further because he didn't know Dao Xin, and his current status and strength was far beneath his notice. He was more interested in Jian Daiyu. Just as he was about to speak, Mei Yang cheerfully clapped. He's our additional support, a peak mortal god. This will only serve to decrease the effort we need to put in. As for division of resources, we'll wait until we've thoroughly completed the job before discussing, K. Her cheerful, brilliant smile was truly an uplifting act. Wei Wuyin didn't bother with all this, walking forward to try to talk to Jian Daiyu. Unfortunately, let's go. She spoke coldly and, with concerted coordination, she and her disciples swiftly shot off. They weren't utilizing qi to invigorate their bodies, relying in their strengthened physical forms to traverse their path. Mei Yang smiled, chuckling as she gave Wei Wuyin the side eye. Seeing Wei Wuyin try to approach Jian Daiyu and fail was quite amusing. Us too. With those words, she led the Scarlet Solaris sect members away, following the Sky Sword sect. Dong Fa was quiet for a moment and then gave the same order. It wasn't long before Wei Wuyin was left alone. He had a wry smile as he realized Jian Daiyu's swift departure was to avoid being tied with his advances. He chuckled, but the challenge was invigorating. Most women nowadays were easily obtained with his high cultivation base and handsome looks, but she might take a little more effort. With a kick-off, he vanished. Unlike the others, his body was refined by all 9 elemental energies, saber energy, and draconic blood energies, and the first 2 were godlord level. It was strong to the utmost, so when he relied on merely his physical body, not only did he catch up, in a flash, he had already bypassed them. Jian Daiyu was already behind him. With a swift turn of his body, he halted his steps. It wasn't long before Jian Daiyu arrived. Her eyes flashed with shock as she saw the smiling Wei Wuyin in front of her. She halted her steps too, with the others halting in response. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself personally, Wei Wuyin, it's a pleasure to meet the renowned sword flash goddess. He was polite yet confident. Jian Daiyu was an extremely reticent woman. Her emotions and thoughts were hard to extract, and she barely responded to much. That reserved demeanor with her incredible beauty and intense sharpness made her seem like an empress of a mortal empire. She blinked. At the moment, they were all not revealing their spiritual sense as to not trigger any alert formation, so she nor anyone had seen Wei Wuin's movement. However, seeing his intent to introduce himself, she inwardly grew annoyed. How could a woman of her beauty and talent not be pursued endlessly? She knew the signs. Therefore, she coldly stated, "Stay on task. Follow, and don't make a mistake." With that, she directly shot off, followed by the members of her sect who gave Wei Wuyin all sorts of looks, including shock and a hint of pity. To try to court this woman was a fool's mission, even for a peak mortal god. Wei Wuyin merely saw them off, his eyes glimmering with a hint of calculation and plotting. After Mei Yang arrived, he had a brilliant smile on his face. She saw him and was startled, but before she could ask a question, Wei Wuyin shot off ahead of them, but this time at a slower pace to merely trail behind. Mei Yang frowned. How did he bypass them when they left earlier? Her eyes flashed a mysterious light as she followed along. Dong Fa arrived and saw Wei Wuin's silhouette and his heart quaked. Indeed, he is a god lord. With two, this mission should be easy. With renewed vigor, he similarly made plans to place himself in Wei Wuin's list of friends. Chapter 90. 89, Commencement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Sky Sword domain was vast, incredibly so. It spanned across an area of hundreds of thousands of kilometers, featuring diverse environments such as mountain ranges, dormant volcanoes, clear lakes, thick and vigorous rivers, and tall, damp forests. Its variety also made it a cultivation haven, with many locations having dense and pure energies whilst simultaneously birthing all sorts of materials. Its diverse and vast stretches of land that allowed it to be prosperous and resource-rich similarly made it difficult to manage. The sheer volume of materials produced and generated could never be regulated by a single sect or clan, and the total area could never be fully governed. Even the Sky Sword sect could only control 20% of the entire area, and even then only about 5% was strictly under their supervision. In this grand domain, there was a valley that stretched for tens of miles, deeply entrenched between a wall of rock formations. The chasm was hard to see, even if one flew over it. When they looked down, there would be all sorts of obstructions, the primary of which was white mist that lingered above the rock walls and rolled downwards like smoke. This mist made it very difficult to visually perceive anything below or within the chasm. If one peered deeper, they'd see various esoteric markings and uniquely designed lines that structured a grand yet subtle spiritual formation. It melded perfectly with the natural brown-ish color of the rock walls. The faint spiritual energies funneled into this formation could mislead the perception of spiritual sense, even hinder sensory or optical-based spiritual spells. And that, alongside the natural concealments offered by the valley, this was a perfect location to hide. Within the valley wasn't nothing. There were buildings and people traversing about. It was a small city, condensed and compressed within a few tens of miles. It could be considered a modernized village by cultivation standards, having similar civilization traits of a normal city of the myriad-year continent, and it housed 9,430.2 souls. There were paved streets, chi-arrays, and even formations set to gather, refine, and exude the essence of heaven and earth. And this did not seem to be a location structured in short notice, as there was complex irrigation, buildings, plumbing, and roads that definitely took a decade or so to properly set. Like many prestigious families, the Yuhei clan had set up a safety net in case of the worst-case scenario. Considering their ancestor that had exceeded the chi condensation realm was nearing their end, how could they not make preparations? The dwindling of generational talents further cemented their inevitable downfall. This city was the core location picked and set to house the members of the Yuhei clan until they could give birth to a rightful heir with sufficient talent capable of regaining their throne. If this heir never came to be, then to fade into history, change their surname, and start anew in Wu country was their objective. If things went their way, they could claim another country as their own, once more retaking the Yuhei name then. At the center of this city was a magnificently designed three-storied castle. The walls were white, glistening with a purity while the roofs were dark-colored with the edges being blue. It was truly an impressive sight. In this castle were two men. A young strapping lad with a square-cut jaw and short brown hair, and a middle-aged man with a tall stature and muscles that were as thick as a grown man's legs. They were both impressive, sporting outstanding presences, but their eyes reflected a somber glint. "Father, is the news of our location being leaked true?" The young man, Yuhei Chen, asked. A tinge of worry quivered in his tone as he spoke. The middle-aged man, Yuhei Yen, furrowed his brows in response, remaining silent for several seconds before inevitably releasing a deep sigh. He merely said, "I don't think your sister would make such a mistake." He, as the strongest expert of the remaining Yuhei clan, a godlord, had the heavy responsibility of ensuring the survival of their bloodline and legacy. However, could his bloodline be the cause of their demise? Yuhei Chen urgently said, "But if she did, aren't we all in danger? She's always been willful and selfish, and with her relations with that man, it's entirely possible that she spilled some information. I simply don't trust her words at all, and she clearly doesn't fully understand the consequences." His words were pleading, but in truth, he didn't know what he wanted to achieve. For the last 2 decades, they'd etched out this slice of concealed heaven to bide their time. This location was the fail-safe of the entire Yuhei family, and with procedures set, this location should remain a hidden secret barring accidents for at least a century. However, his little sister, to put it plainly, was in love. To put it honestly, she was an idiot. There was a young man from an unaffiliated force in the Sky Sword domain called Huamanhu. He belonged to the Earth-Sky Alliance, and they briefly met before the collapse of the Yuhei family years ago. It seemed his innate charm had driven his sister stupid as she pined for his affection day and night. Moreover, she sent a transmission crystal out to him, breaking every last safety protocol set. It was only because she swore that she had only sent a small love message telling him that she'll wait, no matter how long, to be together that they hadn't upended everything in fear. Yuhei Yen could only sigh, both from his mouth and heart. He raised a daughter that dwelled on romance, but was that good or bad? "I've made preparations. If an attack is imminent, we won't be caught with our pants down." Yuhei Yen reassured, but it obviously had no effect on Yuhei Chen's worried mood. His expression was still flashing with doubt, worry, and trepidation of an assault. At this time, outside the mountain valley, a group quietly arrived without a hint of leaking their chi. They moved silently, all their auras reserved and their demeanors exemplifying professional conduct. Mei Yang was at the lead, her eyes quietly observed the beguiling white mist as she quietly muttered to herself. The words were indistinct and unintelligible, but as she spoke, traces of calculation flashed within her charming eyes. "Ming Shi, inspect this formation," she called and ordered. A young woman arrived. She was middle-aged and ordinary-looking, but her mature charm and placid gaze radiated intelligence that could intimidate the opposing gender. She approached the white mist and kneeled, her hands quietly formed hand seals as she started to mutter quietly in a manner similar to Mei Yang. She was a formation master. They were experts that studied chi arrays and spiritual formations. It was a well-respected profession and study, but unlike alchemy, it was a secondary skill trained by many cultivators. Even Wei Wuyin studied spiritual formations, capable of erecting them with various spiritual spells. However, true formation masters dedicated a majority of their cultivation path into creation, deconstructing, and analyzing the profundities of formations and arrays, so they were incredibly skilled. An example of difference between them and ordinary cultivators who casually delved into the study was that, while ordinary cultivators could set up formations, it was rather difficult to destabilize or downright deactivate it without brute force. After 20 or so minutes, Ming Shi stood up. A pure beguiling spiritual formation set up by several godlords, but there's an alert formation integrated expertly within. The main formation is hexagonal in structure and has 6 crucial points, while the alert formation is a dual design, with 2 points. Her analysis gave them ample information. Mei Yang, Jian Daiyu, and Dong Fa quietly considered this knowledge and their approach. Shockingly, Mei Yang didn't take the lead as the strongest cultivator and discussed the plan of action with the others, including their own formation masters. This continued for a few minutes until a conclusion was reached. Wei Wuyin simply quietly waited to the side. He was a last-minute addition, and while his cultivation base was impressive, his comprehension towards formations definitely paled in comparison to these experts who trained for hundreds of years. He was more focused on finding an opportunity to enact his plan to Wu Jian Daiyu. We'll split into 2 groups, eliminate the alert formation and then forcefully shatter the beguiling formation. This was Mei Yang and the others' plan. She would use her high cultivation base to shatter the formation and launch an assault. They would storm the location from 2 sides, with the order to kill with extreme prejudice. If there's weak cultivators or mortals that can be incapacitated and restrained with ease, then that would be good as well. Later, they could be sold or used to extract information about the Yuhei clan. They may get lucky. Wei Wuyin didn't interject his own opinion. Again, he was merely a last-minute addition and he was focused on other matters. Dong Fa and Wei Wuyin, you'll lead your team to the southern formation node. When you receive the transmission, destroy it. Me and Jian Daiyu will take the northern formation node, then I'll strike the nearest node for the beguiling formation. That'll be the signal to strike. Mei Yang assigned them with a smile. Taken aback, Wei Wuyin was about to say something. I think, this is the preferred and optimal line. Up, Mei Yang interrupted with a knowing smile. She was obviously acting to decrease his chances of interacting with Jian Daiyu. He suspected this might have been done on her own prerogative, but Jian Daiyu may have also desired this. He shrugged. Fine, let it be. Abruptly, he felt a sudden sensation. It was an ominous twist in his heart that seemed to prelude something. Unfortunately, this feeling came and went as swiftly as it occurred. His eyes changed subtly. I'll take this mission a little bit more seriously. With his mentality instantly overturned, he and Dong Fa's group left under the lead of a formation master. While he was leaving, he looked back and saw that beautiful swordswoman. In the end, he turned away and focused. After a few minutes, they were in position. Dong Fa had tried to start a conversation with Wei Wuyin, but Wei Wuyin wasn't in the mood to make friends. His mentality had already changed and besides perfunctory replies, it led to nothing substantial. SSSMM. A transmission crystal in Dong Fa hands lit, and he turned serious. At this time, he acted alone, but he was more than enough. Strands of his white hair started to release frost and cold air, while his entire body started to exude a faint light. Blue light. He focused on the node and clenched his fist. Ice chi that had reached its most sublime state was released, causing the immediate surroundings to lower in temperature. The others expected this, taking a few steps back and forming their chi wards. While Wei Wuyin, who birthed absolute zero ice chi, remained mostly indifferent without a hint of protection. Arctic ice art. Glacial explosion. A fearsome, truly glacial and frosty power erupted from Dong Fa's fist. This was an art designed for his unique cultivation method, a part of a series of arts that worked incredibly well for it, amplifying his combat strength. These types of cultivation methods were called legacy arts. They existed in high-level methods. Wei Wuyin lacked this, as all the chi cultivation methods he obtained this far have lacked any form of specialized arts or spells. Only the true dragon transmutation method was of this category, possessing martial arts and spiritual spells suited for its specific cultivation structure. This was what Wei Wuyin truly lacked in comparison to other godlords, with almost all of his arts being generalized arts and spells designed for all cultivators that fit a general criteria such as cultivating fire qi or lightning qi. And the power of this art was exceptional. Within that fist was a frosty force of incredible power. He swung downwards and smashed into the ground, causing an explosion similar to a geyser eruption. The earth lifted was shoved away, creating a frost-covered crater that reached deep. The node had been destroyed. Boom! Shortly after, a small sun-like existence appeared to the south and smashed downwards, erupting in a brilliantly devastating explosion of fire and light, the workings of the Helios witch. She had taken action to shatter the beguiling formation. The mist cleared up almost instantly. The chasm revealed numerous humans with lifted heads as they observed the sky, confusion and even fear in their eyes. There were kids playing ball in their playgrounds, adults enjoying sensual times with their loved one, and laughter as people enjoyed the company of their fellow man. They had no idea of the hell that was about to descend. Mei Yang shot into the sky, her eyes vicious and glacial unlike her normally playful and cheerful self. She coldly shouted, "Kill."